Hey, party people, what's up? It's time for another edition of DJ to DJ. I am your man, DJ Fernando G, and as always, we got another amazing talent. Today we have a legend because we got the man whose name and voice is synonymous with house and EDM across the nation and around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Swedish Egil. What's up, my brother? How are you?
I am great, thank you. Wonderful introduction. Thank you, Fernando. That's very kind of you.
My pleasure, dude. And it's all true, man. It's all true. Everybody that knows about house music and EDM, they've come across you. So you're a legend, my friend. You a legend.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure. So this little platform here, as you know, is to help other DJs find out about DJs such as yourself and how they got started, how they learned to beat mix, and what it took to get to where they are today. So as always, we're going to travel back in time for a sec. And let's get into it. So first question, how did you discover DJing?
Oh my God, it's so long ago. And it was a very different style of DJing back then. Believe it or not, I started as a DJ in 1969. That was my first gig in my home country of Sweden in 1969.
I was 2 years old, man.
So now we're both giving it away. Anyway, I had a friend of mine had one of the first mobile DJ outfits in the country of Sweden. And he was doing a lot of parties and events in southern Sweden. And I was really good friends with his younger brother. And at one gig at a hotel on the beach in Sweden, in Falsterbo, Sweden, he had placed a sound system there in the club. And then the DJ DJ'd in between the band's sets. And the band was like playing the organ and the saxophone and guitar and the drums, kind of like those bar bands, you know. So one time the DJ didn't show up. I took his place, and then after that, the other DJ never came back, and that was the start of my DJ career. And then that was during the summer, and then in the fall, I went to a boarding school in Sweden, and after a couple of weeks, they had dances every 2 weeks, and I proposed that we, instead of using a reel-to-reel with a pre-recorded non-mix of music coming out through the lid of the of the reel-to-reel, that we would instead rent this mobile DJ system with blinking lights and let me DJ. And so that's how I started. And then after a few months, it was me and a friend of mine, Kutte. We got a residency in another small town, and we were there every Friday night. And then a DJ agency in Sweden contacted us and asked us if we were interested in having DJs from Radio Luxembourg come. And that was another inspiration for me. Radio Luxembourg was like the equivalent of pirate radio, but legally broadcasting from Luxembourg. And they played a lot of really cool music, and they had a lot of really cool DJs. Nobody was mixing or anything like that. Everybody was just like a personality talking in between the records. So that's what we wanted to do in the clubs. And listening to Radio Luxembourg, I was super inspired by that. And when that promoter asked if we were interested in having some of the Radio Luxembourg DJs come to that little town, we immediately said yes. And they asked me to go and pick him up at the airport in Copenhagen. So, you know, I felt super blessed driving him around in Sweden, talking to him, spending all this quality time with him. And the night remained very popular, and we continued to play there. And then one of those DJs was Tony Prince. And Tony Prince later on started something that you might be interested in going to yourself, or any one of your listeners. It's called the Disco Mix Club, DMC. And I'm sure you've heard of the DMC battleship. Yeah, that was all of my friend Tony Prince who did that.
Wow.
After he left Radio Luxembourg, he continued to do that. And we continued working together. And he pretty much advised me and recommended that I'd go to America. He wanted to go to America. I was never really able to. And he said, you should go to America. So I did. And I came here with a friend of mine. His name was Bruce. And me and Bruce, we had been here for a very short time, walked into a radio station in Los Angeles called K100 in 1976, 100.3 on the FM dial. Anyway, it was like a top 40 kind of a rock station. The friend of the program director Eric Chase. And Eric Chase had been asked only a couple of weeks before that by a mobile DJ company to provide them with music. The mobile DJ company figured he was a program director at a radio station that's popular. He probably has a lot of records. We have no records. So if we pay him X amount of money a month, he'll give us a bunch of music. Well, it was all good, except that the program director didn't know what to give to the mobile DJ company to make people dance.
Right.
So when he met us, he said, I'm going to introduce you to this mobile DJ company. You can help me out. So the first thing is we had been here for like a couple of weeks, from Sweden. We're now invited up to the inner offices of this popular radio station on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. And he said he had, the radio station had this huge library at the time of mostly 45s.
Yeah.
And he said, you can go through the library. You can pick any tunes you want. You can pick some for that mobile DJ company. You can pick some for yourselves. And we had stacks and stacks and stacks of records.
It's like hitting a gold mine, man.
Yeah, exactly. Soon after, this is all within a couple of weeks, the mobile DJ company asked us to do a party at the Disneyland Hotel, like a Christmas party in the month of December.
Nice.
2,000 dentists had rented the space. They rented us as DJs. And me and my friend Bruce, we were experienced DJs from Sweden. By this time, we'd been playing for many, many years. We know how to get people to dance. We played mostly Motown, Atlantic, soul, and funk music. James Brown, The Temptations, Papa Was a Rolling Stone. One song for sure I remember playing a lot was Rick Dees' Disco Duck.
Disco Duck.
and the Trams, something about Burn This... Disco Inferno by the Trams, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the party we did really good at that Christmas party. And the mobile DJ company said, we want to hire you guys. So we basically went home to Sweden, packed up our stuff, and came back here in the beginning of 1977.
Wow.
And the owner of the mobile DJ company was a really good salesman. So he got us gigs playing post-Grammy parties, post-Oscar parties.
Wow.
And the competition was so little, Fernando. There was like a half a dozen mobile DJ companies in LA in 1977. Yeah. Most people hired bands. Yeah. So we came out and DJ'd, and because we were playing at all these different cool places, record companies contacted us, and especially one label called Casablanca Records, which was the home to Donna Summer, Village People, and that whole sound, Giorgio Moroder, and that sort of, like Giorgio Moroder and the Village People, they had electronic drums. It was like a mechanical drum now, so it made it a little bit easier to mix. Not that I really knew too much about mixing at the time, but that was the very beginning of learning how to mixing those records for that audience. And we played a lot of 45s first, where it was more important what the song was, whether it beat mixed out of the previous record or not.
That is cool. That's a cool story, man. I mean, the interesting thing is like for me, I started to learn how to mix in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. That's when I discovered turntables and a mixer and all that stuff. However, I really loved new wave and all the high energy disco that was coming out. So I found it very difficult to mix the new wave because that was still live drums. Yeah. And the disco was a little more on the electronic side. Even though there were still some that were still using live drums, it was still a little thing. So for you, what was you go to? Like for me, when I learned to beat mix, I got 2 records of Sunbell's Spin It because I could distinguish that beat. And what was your go-to to actually figure out beat mixing?
That's a good question. I had been mixing on many mixers that didn't have cue. Like you couldn't cue, you couldn't hear the other, these weren't mixers made for mixing or for DJ clubs and stuff like that. They were like PA mixers that were modified to become mixers that you can mix with. I remember specifically having like a TIAC mixer, I think were pretty popular, where you have to have a left and a right for the one turntable and a left and a right for the other one. That's 4 buttons you got to move up and down. And there was no crossfader.
Wow.
And so to keep 4 buttons going and to try to keep it on beat. Also, this is pre-1200 turntables. So there was the pitch control was very iffy. Like there was, I heard the interview you did with Tony B, where he was talking about you had a little button to turn for you to adjust the speed. Yep, and it was very sensitive because the turntable was on shock mounts and rubber bands and stuff. So the thing would go up and down and swing. You have to be super careful. Techniques came out with a turntable before the 1200 that had like a plus and minus with the digital readout. And I got pretty good on those. And I think for me, it was probably not really during the disco days. So what happened to me is that at the end of the 70s, disco eventually started to it was not that popular anymore. It was like people started to bag on it. K-Rock was really bad-mouthing disco. I discovered K-Rock and New Wave and was still playing disco. And then the movie Urban Cowboy came out with John Travolta. And all the clubs in Southern California went from within a month or a couple of months from having all disco dancing to having country nights and disco dancing, not necessarily on the same night, 2 different audiences. In order for me, this was my full-time job. Either I could not work, try to find another gig, or switch to country. So I opted to switch to country. And I lived in an apartment complex where there were 2 professional bull riders who knew all about the music. They had dance instructors at the club that knew about the dancing. I went to a wholesale place for 45s, a place where people with jukeboxes would go buy their records. And I went in there with the bull riders and said, show me the big hits. And they pulled out records and we bought hundreds of dollars worth of records, country music. And for a year, I played country music. And also the disco and rock, but also country music. Then I discovered K-Rock. And I really for me, it was the Human League, OMD, Oingo Boingo, and the Go-Go's, but also the Stray Cats and the English Beat. And many of those songs were not very mixable. They didn't have any intros. They didn't have any outros to mix. They were just songs. So again, I went back to my old style of DJing, which was basically radio hosting an evening by talking a little bit and putting on another song. I did that. I did that for many years, and I think for most of my career at K-Rock, as Acid House started to come out, as Depeche Mode started to have extended 12 inches and stuff like that, I started the first mix show on K-Rock back in maybe 1984, 1985 time. There was something called the American DJ Association with this guy called Randy Cunningham, or Randy Pool. It was a DJ pool where DJs can go and pick up their records. Yeah. He had this idea to do mix up the top 20. He came out with a top 20 chart every week to give to the record companies to let them know what music we were playing.
Right.
And he came up with this idea, but I wasn't really ready to mix then. So I hired other DJs to start mixing with me. Tony Largo was one of those guys, and he had a friend that was mixing with him, and Donna Montel is another name that I remember from the past, from that time. So they were mixing and I was hosting. Also, Simply Jeff was a mixer for me during the K-Rock days. And the countdown went from Saturday afternoons to late night on Friday night. And eventually, when K-Rock was bought by another company, they ended the countdown. But then at that time, there was so much of this sort of electronic, industrial, acid house, Depeche Mode, New Order remixes coming out that, I really wanted to more and more start to mix that. Yeah. And then in 1991, I left K-Rock to become a music director at something called Mars FM, where we were the first radio station here in Southern California to play house and techno music in rotation. Like we played the Orb, the Prodigy, Moby, the Shaman, stuff like that.
I used to love listening to that
time,
station. You were freaking busting out tracks like left and right, like almost every week. I was like, oh, what is this? I gotta get this. It's freaking awesome, man.
I know, like L.A. Style, James Brown is Dead, and Apotheosis, 0 for Tuna, and so many.
All of those tracks, man.
Yeah, that was a great time, man. So at that time, I had a little inkling about what mixing was all about, but not very much because I'm not very musical. So I didn't really know about phrasing or beat counting. I knew about beat counting to get the BPM number, but really how they interacted with one and each other is something that I, over a long period of time, slowly learned. So there wasn't a moment where I practiced and got it good enough to do. I would go out and kind of like fake it the best way I could at many of these gigs. And in the end, at Mars FM, me and Simply Jeff, we did a night at the Palace, Avalon today. It's called, I can't remember what it's called now. But anyway, I remember being there. And you know, there was like you try to get them as close as possible. And then with a crossfader, sometimes a quick fade over to the other record. And then so I learned how to do that. And then also during the 90s, I started a reggae. At K-Rock, I had started a reggae show called Reggae Revolution.
I remember
and
that.
I never really mixed reggae. But at Mars FM, and then after Mars, when I started Groove Radio in 1992 and started a show called Planet Reggae, I also learned a little bit how to mix reggae music, which was different because it was more like mixing hip hop, where you would just really go from verse to chorus of another song and do a quick fade as opposed to like a long overlaying the beats.
Right.
But I would advise anybody getting started today wanting to know how to do it to get some basic instruction about how music functions, how music is built, measures, and stuff like that is very important.
The cool thing about it today, I mean, DJs that are starting now, they're never gonna know the struggles that yourself and I went through, carrying milk crates filled with records and hauling the big ass speakers and stuff. And now, you know, you got a DJ controller, you got your flash drive filled with, you know, 60 gigs worth of music and MP3s, and you see the WAV file, you see your BPMs, you just match them and you're all set. You know, before, I mean, it was all ear, you know,
it was
riding
all
that
ear.
pinch control.
Yeah, the best thing you could look for was a little bit of a shade in the vinyl to tell you that there was going to be a break or a breakdown. The grooves looked a little different. That was the only cue you had. The rest of it, you would have to remember, you know, the music and how the music was built. And then, of course, when people were making records back then, and especially the people that were editing on reel-to-reel weren't always precise. So a little bit of a goofy edit will throw off your mix once the record was pressed.
That is for sure. So what would you say were the DJs that inspired you when you were coming up, like as a club DJ and stuff? Who were the ones that you were saying, wow, this guy's pulling out some crazy stuff. This guy's doing some cool things.
Arthur Baker, for example, he's one of the earliest names I can remember. Shep Pettibone, the DJs from DMC. And as soon as we started Mars FM, I went to New York to something called the New Music Seminar, which preceded the Winter Music Conference. It was the same idea, but it was the New Music Seminar in New York. And it was a mixture of dance and alternative rock bands, and would be in all of the clubs in New York. And I went to a club called The Building, saw Moby carrying in his keyboard, you know, in a suitcase. He came in by himself, carrying it in, set it up, and eventually when he was on, played the song Go and rocked that place like I've never seen before. And I remember seeing Moby because even even back then, the electronic music equipment, I don't know how easy it was to sync up. So I could see him mouthing and then hit the button, and he absolutely blew me away. And I got a copy of that song and took it back to Mars FM, and we started playing that song. And then Moby became one of those guys that really inspired me. Soon after, also Destructo, who was, doing raves.
Yeah.
And then Destructo had a record company with a famous rock producer, Rick Rubin, and the name of the label was the White Label. And their first signing was a band called Praga Khan that we had in heavy rotation on Mars FM, industrial techno band from Belgium. And they were going to come here to Mars FM to do an interview. And right at that time, Mars FM decided to become Jazz FM instead, or the owner got cold feet because we played too much techno music. They had banned techno music on the station, you may remember, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I did that interview with Praga Khan, and then kept the contact with Destructo and Rick Rubin and what was going on with Praga Khan. And I remember and then as having a different outlet than Mars FM, we started Groove Radio in 1992 as a syndicated show. My first show was Halloween 1992, me and Simply Jeff co-hosting the show together.
Nice.
And then very soon after that, I interviewed like Doc Martin and Richard Vision, of course, and Tony B and AJ Mora. We had been playing The Movement and Jump and everything on Mars FM. Right. Richard invited me to come to PowerTools and start DJing with him. But Destructo gave me a C120, meaning a 2-hour cassette tape. And on the cassette tape was 2 hours, 1 hour on each side of Carl Cox mixing. Wow. Carl Cox was getting ready to release a mixtape, or I think this is pre-CD, so it was probably just a mixtape. It was freaking amazing. And he was so skilled that even when he was making it, and he made what he thought maybe wasn't the best segue, he'd spin the record back and do the segue one more time. But it sounded so entertaining that became one of the best mixes I ever had on Groove Radio International, in the beginning of my show, to have freaking Carl Cox.
Yeah.
And then
that's awesome.
I met Sven Väth, I met Paul Van Dyke, and Sasha and John Digweed. All these guys were totally unknown. Nobody knew who they were. Richard knew who they were. We had them on PowerTools. We had it on Groove Radio. Right. And those were the people that inspired me. Like Sasha really inspired me of how him and John Digweed would make those super smooth blends forever and ever.
Yeah.
Richard and Tony B, for example, was more like Jack and House, where it was like going back and forth and spin backs and things like that. They had a totally different style. So that's what I learned from those DJs.
Yeah, and those guys, I mean, for me, it was like Timo Maas, Paul Oakenfold.
Yes.
I mean, those sounds that they were coming out with at that time, it was just like, wow. And like you say, those long transitions that was just like, you could hear both songs just riding and one just slowly fading out. I used to just love listening to that. And it was just freaking awesome.
Those guys for me came a little bit later. Timo Maas and I became really good friends. By this time, the Winter Music Conference had started in Miami. Groove Radio was broadcasting from Miami, and Timo Maas was one of the artists. Pete Tong was another artist that we featured, and he and Tony Prince, going all the way back to DMC again. Yeah. Tony Prince and Pete Tong made sure that I met Paul Oakenfold in Miami. And Paul Oakenfold and I are still close friends today, and I help produce his radio show now.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah. So talking about producing radio shows, how did you come up with the concept of Groove Radio? What was the inspiration behind it?
God. I think that at Mars FM was a mixture. It was a transition from K-Rock to electronic music. So we played a lot of the Manchester sound in Spiral Carpets, the Smiths, the Charlatans, bands like that. There was like sort of half rock music with a good groove, and then the music on the other side of it was more like electronic music, Depeche Mode, and like music made with synthesizers and drum machines and stuff like that.
Right.
And I think that what we wanted to do at Groove Radio was to have nothing but the electronic music, like put the alternative rock music aside. As cool as that was, it was sort of not as important as the electronic music. So that was one of the reasons. And then I think that, we had done the mix show already at K-Rock since like the mid 80s. So, the countdown, like the mix show that we did back then, it was because of that guy, Randy Cunningham. We started out with a countdown, and the countdown concept, it was at least 2 hours long. And at Mars FM, it was simply Jeff and this guy called Robin I still work with today, and DJ Dan, and they were the guys that made those mixes for Mars FM that aired on Saturday afternoon, and it was a 2-hour show. So that was a 2-hour show in a countdown style. And then I think at Mars FM, we probably had other guest DJs like Tony Largo that would come on and mix on Mars FM. So then taking it to Groove Radio, and also I must say, like, I would listen to Power 106, and I would hear Richard Vision do PowerTools. And he then had the concept of doing half-hour mixes or maybe 1-hour mixes.
Right.
I think PowerTools was 4 hours long when he started. Groove Radio International was 4 hours long when I started. And of course, our shows are shorter now, but yeah. And so I was a guest DJ at PowerTools from 1991 to 2000. And in 2000, I became a resident host. Still there.
Very cool. Very cool. And what was the, now, obviously you met Richard when they were promoting, Jump and the movement
right
back in those days. How did that relation start to develop to where you began hosting and working so closely with him?
We were playing the movement and Jump on Mars FM. So I invited Richard to come in as an artist guest. And I think Richard and the other guys from the movement, Hayes and AJ Mora, came into the station. Then shortly thereafter is when Mars FM ended and became Jazz FM. And Richard had started PowerTools already. And Richard asked me to come over to PowerTools and be a guest on his show to explain what had happened to Mars FM. I should also say, just like a little quick of a backtrack, during my time at K-Rock, I had an intern. His name is Christer Modig. We called him Swedish Chris. And Boris and Chris became a mixed team on Power 106.
Yes.
And they inspired me a lot. But before they worked at Power 106, they mixed for K-Rock and for me on K-Rock.
I did not
know that. And then they left to go work at Power. And then when Chris went back to Sweden and Boris started to just do gigs, Richard took over and started PowerTools. And that kind of replaced what Boris and Chris had done at Power 106.
Interesting.
And then Richard invited me to come to PowerTools. And so I did that. And then not that long after that, Richard started to do, I think the Dome came before Diva. So he started to do the Dome. And then they had this idea to broadcast from the Dome. And then Richard was busy mixing. So it was me and Tony B would sit in a big ass bus out in the parking lot of Florentine Gardens and have fun and broadcast. And then it just went on and on and on. And then I got busy. We put Groove Radio at 103.1 from basically 1994 to 1997. In the first couple of years, 94, 95, it was on the weekends. From 96 to 97, 24/7 Groove Radio at 103.1.
Yeah. Then
that ended. And at that time, I was, what's it called now? I had some notes here to help my memory a little bit. There was what was it called? There was like basically you found radio on your television. There was like all these different services with all these different channels.
Remember that, yeah.
And Groove Radio was on one of those channels. We were programming one of those channels. The lady who I worked for at the time ended up at Sirius XM. And Sirius XM was called CD radio back in the day. This now is like 1998. Also, after Groove Radio ended at 103.1, I started a record company with Priority Records called Eagle Music, where I would release mix CDs, some by myself and some by other DJs. And we put out a whole bunch of them. And then, oh God. So that was probably the time, trying to think and remember all of what was happening at the time. But yeah, I think that that's when I really started to work at Sirius, even though, and like I said, Sirius was called CD Radio. That was 1998. Did a record company and Sirius at the same time until 2000. In 2000, this company called Enigma Digital came and asked if we wanted to do grooveradio.com and be an online radio station, properly funded. It was us, KNAC, a hip hop station, 2 other formats. We were 5 formats out of a building in Santa Monica. And Groove Radio, because there was a bunch of competition, but no way the competition is today. Right. But we were like a top 5 radio station around the world, attracting people like Pete Tong, Paul Oakenfold, and the BBC. The BBC came and asked if we wanted to air Pete Tong's Essential Show on our radio station because we were making so much noise at grooveradio.com. Cool. And then we filled, we had people come in like all the time. There were so many different people like BT, Ronnie Size, Carl Cox, Roger Sanchez, Faithless, LTJM Bookham, Sasha, Basement Jacks, Groove Armada, like all these bands came through Groove Radio at that time.
That's wild, man. And you've definitely, I mean, I love listening to like all the interviews that you've done throughout the years, and just the guest DJs that have been on there. It's just been phenomenal. I mean, just people that I've idolized for many, many, many years. On a regular day, aside from EDM, house, and all the electronic music, what does Swedish Eagle listen to on a Sunday afternoon, for example?
Swedish Eagle, it's always working.
That's the thing.
Yeah. So I don't know if you know, I also host. I'm a resident host at Sirius XM channel called First Wave.
Yes.
That plays new wave music 24/7. And my shift is from 6 p.m. until midnight, Monday through Friday.
Wow.
And so I spend a lot of time keeping up with what's happening with those artists today. It's me and Richard Blade, basically, from the old K-Rock. Sluggo is on there too, and then Larry the Duck from the East Coast. We're the ones that are hosting on that channel.
Very cool.
And then I've been, producing many other people's radio shows over the years. Now, COVID has made it difficult because I can't go and see people. One of the things that I would do is to go to Paul Oakenfold's house or Swedish House Mafia's house or Antoine's house or Borgor's house and record their voice tracks, coach them, and make sure I would write and produce, or along with my wife, my producer, we would work out what they were going to say, and then I would go there and record them. And now to do it over Zoom, it's okay, but it's not like it was when you go there in person. So
exactly,
a lot of things have changed, but basically, I think I spend most of my time going to blogs looking for new music, because you can't just go to Beatport and look in the top 10 to get an idea of what's happening. You have to dig a lot deeper than that. There is politics in the songs that end up on Beatport as well. Yeah. So if you want to make sure that you're sort of in touch with what's new and breaking, you have to listen to a lot more music. And then I go and compare, see maybe how they're doing on Beatport, but that doesn't really influence my decision. It's just like a barometer to see what other people are doing with this music. So I spend way too much music, listening to new music. And there is, as you know, this is the most music there's ever been. And now during COVID, nobody's out doing anything else. Everybody is at home producing one way or another. So I got all this music. Like earlier this year,
I started producing right now. I'm
really?
working on my first track. So it's like,
well, be sure to send it to me for now when you're ready.
I will definitely do that. And that's interesting, because that's one of the things that I think COVID did for the DJ world, which was it really helped spark our creativity, because I feel like many DJs, and not all, but many, were getting kind of complacent as to what they were doing, where they were at, and then having to get locked up. I think, boom, it's like, okay, well, what do I do now? They had to
100%.
Yeah, we had to reinvent ourselves, really. I mean, look at me. I mean, I started doing this podcast, and I was like, here we go. Now I'm producing, and I mean, it's something that I think was a blessing, even though it's still a bad thing, but still for us DJs, I think it helped us out.
Right. One of the good things to come out of a really bad thing.
Exactly. Well said. Well said. What was do you recall an event or a club that really wowed you, that you said, I cannot believe I'm spinning here. This is freaking amazing. Is there a venue as such?
Well, the Palace. I mean, we had, many terrific nights at the Palace, first with K-Rock and then with Mars FM. That's probably one of my favorite places of all to go to and to spin at. I was part of the Monster Massive and the what was it called? Together as One for many years. Cool. Reza booked me at many amazing events, but also at the same time, radio kept me really busy. And because I sort of chose radio instead of producing music, I've had moments in my career. I had a really good moment with my nephew, Carl Norén. Carl and he did all of the work. I had the expertise or the experience, and Carl had the know-how and the equipment. He lived in Sweden and I was here, and we would produce music together, and he figured out a way that we can listen over iTunes, and we could know exactly where in the song we were. We could discuss whether the vocal was too loud or not loud enough, and did a bunch of remixes. And we had several records come out on Paul Oakenfold's Perfecto Records. I did remixes for Richard Vision and for other people, but never really made that my career. And in order to get booked at important venues and events, you had to have hit records. And I had concentrated on making radio as opposed to making hit records.
Very cool. Very cool. You are definitely one of those guys that's just nonstop. I mean, because you got Groove Radio, PowerTools, Sirius, you got Paul Oakenfold, and I don't know how many other radio shows you produce, but you are like literally like nonstop. Do you ever sleep? That's the next one.
Yes. Yes, I do. I try to live a healthy lifestyle, eat good and exercise all the time. And of course now, not being able to go out at all this past year has not necessarily been relaxing, but it's been maybe a little less hectic than before. Not sitting in traffic has been a big plus.
That's wild. That's wild. So we're coming up to the end here of this interview. What's up next for you? Is there anything special coming up in 2021 that you might be working on, that you're adding on to all the many things you got going on?
No, not at the moment. I think what I'm really looking forward to is to be able to go out and do gigs again. Yeah. I did team up with an old friend of mine, this guy, DJ Robin, from the late 80s, early 90s. He is a big fan and knows a lot about the music that we play on First Wave. And I did do a few gigs with him together before. Like, it was a lot of fun to go out and play that 80s music. I had a long time where I didn't really enjoy playing that 80s music as much as I did electronic music. But at the end of 2019, really got another appetite for doing that. And I think that, I don't know if you remember, and I can't even remember the name of it now, but the people at who make at Golden Voice, the people who put on the Coachella Festival, were going to do an event featuring nothing but sort of first wave old K-rock bands. Like they had a whole festival lined up that got canceled twice because of COVID. But the interest in that music, going back to the originals, has never been as big as it is right now. I mean, it's like bigger than it was when the bands were new, because not that many people knew about it. Everybody knows the Depeche Mode, and everybody knows the Human League right now, right? They play "Don't You Want Me, Baby" in freaking the supermarket, but that was one of the most cutting edge records I had when that thing first came out. Yeah. So I'm looking into doing that, continuing with Groove Radio, some form of a Groove Radio tour. And then we'll see what happens. I've done more virtual gigs where people have hired me to do parties. So I have a studio in downtown LA. I got my setup. That's where I do my live mix every Thursday afternoon from 5 to 6, except now for the holidays. But in that setup, I'm alone in the room, but there's lights blinking. There's all kinds of cameras going back and forth. My wife is a really good producer. She puts up all kinds of entertaining videos so you don't have to look at me the whole time. And then people have hired me to do those because of COVID. So I'm not really sure exactly where it's going to go in the future, but, you know, I'm still going to be spinning records.
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's interesting because that was another thing that it's going to be interesting to see how the DJ world evolves now that we've opened up to this virtual world. You know? And I definitely feel that there's going to be people that are going to want this virtual experience. And I only feel that sound and quality, video quality, and everything is only going to get better moving forward.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's going to explode in that aspect as well. I think for sure we're going to go back to, you know, once we start opening up again, it's going to be, you know, crazy all the number of events that are going to take off. People are just they definitely want to get out, but I definitely feel that there's going to be some sort of movement on a virtual tip as well. So it's going to be pretty interesting. Well, listen, Brother Egil, I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with me, man. And I'm so glad that
it's great to catch up again, Fernando. Yeah, you're an OG.
It's been a long time. I, you know, visited you once at Mars, and then, you know, PowerTools and stuff, and, you know, hanging out with the boys with Richard and AJ, you know, back at the beginning, and it was just so much fun, man. And I've always been a big fan of yours, and I love everything that you do. And please keep it up. Keep doing what you're doing, man.
All right. You know, speaking of AJ, we had him on a live Zoom in where he was driving dangerously on the freeway with his phone, talking to me on the Zoom, promoting his brand new artist album. Yeah, it was like a nice circle for me, because AJ was there in the beginning of Groove Radio, and then interviewed him so many times, DJed with him so many times, and here he has now like another artist album that came out that I could help him promote with both audio and video at grooveradio.com. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah. He's an amazing guy. I met AJ in junior high. Yeah. And it's funny because we tell the story about how we became friends, and I was just this naive kid, and I walked in to the classroom, and I was wearing Jordache jeans. So everybody else was wearing regular, you know, jeans and stuff. So I walk in with my Jordache jeans, and I hear this kid in the background start singing the theme, "The Jordache Look," and I'm like, who in the heck is this guy, you know? And so he kept cracking jokes at my expense, and then, you know, I give him this mad dog look, and he was a little shorter than I, and I was a big guy, and I look at him and I said, "Dude, after class, you and I are going to have some words, you know?" So he's all like, whatever. But as soon as the bell rang, boom, I go right outside, and I'm waiting for him. And he sees me there, and he's all like, no, dude, I'm sorry. I was just messing around. He goes, "You see that girl right there?" He goes, "Look, that's Jennifer Allen. And you obviously don't know her. You just got here." She was gorgeous. She was beautiful, blonde, just beautiful girl. And he's all, "Dude, as soon as she saw you, it's like thunderbolt hit her. She fell in love with you. She's whispering things about you, about how cute you are and how good looking, and blah, 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 blah. And I really liked her, man. And for you to walk in, that's why I was poking fun of you." So I was like, all right, obviously the girl didn't give a damn about me, you know. It was like, and he, but
yeah, he just said that.
yeah, he
to
just
calm you down.
he's all like, the girl liked it just so I wouldn't kick his ass and stuff.
Right.
And the rest is history. We became great friends, man. And it was
that's
like,
nice.
we used to go to his house and I used to watch him play piano. And when he got his first keyboard, and I told Richard, I said, you got to hook up with AJ. And then boom, then they took off. Once those two minds got together, it was over, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's very nice. I'm glad you got to share that story with me. It feels like I'm still doing my job. So thank you, Fernando, for being on my show. It was nice to talk to you. Nice to hear a little bit of your history, too.
There you go. Thanks, bud. I appreciate it. Well, listen, again, thank you so much. And you that's watching, if you like this episode, please make sure to hit the like button. Of course, hit the subscribe button as well as the bell so that you get notified, as always, to when I have another amazing talent. Brother Eagle, thank you. Stay safe. God bless. And we'll be in touch, my friend.